Hello everyone, in this video we are going to discuss about base of the brain, particularly the inferior surfaces of cerebral hemispheres, some of the external features of brainstem, interpeduncular fossa, and something about circle of Willis. Now, as you know, the base of the brain, including cerebellum and portion of brainstem, they are in relation to the cranial cavity, anterior, middle and posterior cranial fossa. And this is the anterior cranial fossa, so it is related to the frontal lobe, particularly the frontal pole. In middle cranial fossa, the temporal lobe or temporal pole is related. And in the posterior cranial fossa, this outline belongs to the attachment of tentorium cerebelli. So it will be lodged over here between the occipital lobe above and cerebellum below. So here will be the tentorium cerebelli. So below the attachment of tentorium cerebelli, this portion is related to the cerebellar hemispheres, and above the tentorium cerebelli, this portion or inferior surface of occipital lobes and occipital poles are related to the superior surface of tentorium cerebelli. Now first let's understand the inferior surface of cerebral hemispheres. If we talk about this surface only, if we do not consider brainstem and cerebellum, and if we see this surface only, then there are borders, there are poles, there are some sulci which will form some gyri. Okay, so let's first see this surface in a diagram. Now in this diagram, inferior surface of left cerebral hemisphere is shown. Here will be the frontal pole, then temporal pole and occipital pole. Now let's see some borders. So the medial border is subdivided into three parts. This anterior 1/3 is termed as medial orbital border. The middle 1/3 is termed as hippocampal border just because it is related to the hippocampal formation. And posterior 1/3 is termed as medial occipital border. Laterally, this border up to the temporal pole is termed as superciliary border, and the remaining lateral border is termed as infrolateral border. So this is how the borders are oriented. Now in the frontal surface, you can see some sulci. So a longitudinal sulcus just parallel to this medial orbital border. This is termed as olfactory sulcus, and you can clearly see that the outline is showing olfactory bulb in front and olfactory tract behind, which will bifurcate to form medial and lateral olfactory stria. Now lateral to that, the remaining orbital surface is subdivided by this H-shaped orbital sulcus into anterior, posterior, medial and lateral orbital gyri. The tentorial surface is by and large subdivided into three main gyri by two longitudinally running sulci. This is termed as collateral sulcus. It is an example of complete sulcus because it indents the floor of inferior horn of lateral ventricle, and this extends from occipital lobe to the temporal lobe, so as it is termed as occipitotemporal sulcus. Now these two sulci will divide the inferior surface or tentorial surface into parahippocampal gyrus, medial and lateral occipitotemporal gyrus. So three main gyri are formed by these two sulci. Now in front of this collateral sulcus, this is termed as rhinal sulcus, and continuation of this parahippocampal gyrus in relation to this rhinal sulcus forms a notch-like gyrus. This is termed as uncus. So this is uncus, this is parahippocampal gyrus, which is posteriorly continuous as lingual gyrus. This is posterior part of the calcarine sulcus or post-calcarine sulcus. This is portion of lunate sulcus, and here will be the preoccipital notch. So by and large, these many structures are found, or these many gyri and sulci are found along the inferior surface. Apart from that, you can see portion of optic nerve, optic chiasma, optic tract, and this is the territory of interpeduncular fossa. This is a cut section of the midbrain, and within the interpeduncular fossa you can see tuber, cinereum and infundibulum, mammillary bodies and posterior perforated substance. In relation to the medial and lateral olfactory stria plus optic tract and uncus, there lies anterior perforated substance. So by and large, these many things we need to see in inferior surface or base of the brain. Now let's just quickly overview what we have seen in the diagram. So frontal pole, temporal pole, occipital pole, medial orbital border, hippocampal border, medial occipital border, superciliary border and infralateral border. This is what the olfactory sulcus looks like parallel to the medial orbital border, and it is lodging olfactory tract. This is olfactory tract, and in front there is a dilatation. This is termed as olfactory bulb. Let me bring it a bit closer so you can see the olfactory bulb, which is related to the cribriform plate of ethmoid. And this is olfactory tract, which will divide into medial and lateral olfactory stria. Okay, see over here. Now lateral to that, this is the orbital surface divided by H-shaped sulcus into anterior, posterior, medial and lateral orbital gyri. Similarly, to understand the tentorial surface, let me show you section of cerebral hemisphere. So this is the sagittal section of left cerebral hemisphere, and I wanted to show the tentorial surface into this so you can easily correlate it with the intact brain. So this is frontal surface and this will be the tentorial surface. Now let's just see the tentorial surface into it. This is portion of brainstem and cerebellar hemisphere. If we retract it medially, now the entire tentorial surface is clearly visible. This is temporal pole and this is the occipital pole. Now as we have seen in diagram, this tentorial surface is concavo-convex and it is subdivided by two longitudinal sulci. So this will be the collateral sulcus and this will be the occipitotemporal sulcus, and by and large it is divided from medial to lateral into three gyri: parahippocampal gyrus, medial and lateral occipitotemporal gyri. Now in front, this collateral sulcus is seen in the form of rhinal sulcus, see this, and medial to that is the uncus. So this is what we were discussing in diagram. This is uncus laterally bounded by rhinal sulcus, and continuation of uncus is nothing but parahippocampal gyrus, and behind this parahippocampal gyrus is continuous as lingual gyrus. Okay, this is portion of calcarine sulcus and this is post calcarine sulcus. This is part of lunate sulcus. Okay, and here somewhere will be the preoccipital notch. So this is how it looks like, the tentorial surface. Now in this diagram, it is to show you the boundaries of interpeduncular fossa plus portion of circle of Willis. So this is optic chiasma, which is a quadrilateral plate. It provides attachment to optic nerves anterolaterally and optic tract posterolaterally. So this is optic chiasma and these two are optic tracts. Similarly, this is brainstem, midbrain, pons and medulla, and these two are the basis pedunculi, and this is the upper border of pons. Okay, so let's see the boundaries of interpeduncular fossa. This is the territory of interpeduncular fossa. So anteriorly it is bounded by optic chiasma, anterolaterally by optic tract, posterolaterally by basis pedunculi, and posteriorly by upper border of the pons. So this is the outline, and let's see the structures found within this fossa. From before backward, this is tuber, cinereum and infundibulum, part and parcel of hypothalamus, particularly the infundibulum. When it passes through diaphragma cella, it is continuous with neurohypophysis. Posteriorly, you can see two small sessile structures, nodular structures. These are mammillary bodies, again part and parcel of hypothalamus. And still behind, there is a perforated substance. It is termed as posterior perforated substance just because there is another one over here in relation to the optic tract. this is anterior perforated substance. Now why it is called as perforated substance? Because the branches of posterior cerebral, this is posterior cerebral artery, which is formed by bifurcation of the basilar artery, and this posterior cerebral artery will give central branches. So multiple central branches will pierce the cerebral cortex to enter deep inside, giving it as a perforated structure. So it is termed as perforated substance, and as it is oriented behind to this, then it is termed as posterior perforated substance. Now let's see some of the portion of circle of Willis. All around this interpeduncular fossa you will find arteries, and these are the branches of internal carotid and fourth part of vertebral artery, and they form a circle of Willis around this interpeduncular fossa. Particularly this circle of Willis is found in subarachnoid space. Now in relation to this interpeduncular fossa, the subarachnoid space is expanded, then it is termed as subarachnoid cistern. Expanded subarachnoid space is termed as subarachnoid cistern, and here there is formation of interpeduncular cistern. Within this cistern there lies the circle of Willis. Again I am telling, it is formed by branches of two internal carotids and two fourth part of vertebral arteries. Now these two are internal carotids and they give anterior cerebral arteries. Okay, these two will get connected by anterior communicating branch. Similarly, posteriorly, these two fourth part of vertebral artery will join at lower border of the pons to form a single basilar artery, which will lodge into a median sulcus found along the ventral surface of the pons. So this is basilar artery, which will divide or bifurcate in relation to the upper border of the pons into two posterior cerebral arteries, and these two are posterior communicating arteries. Okay, so this is how the circle of Willis is formed. I am repeating, anteriorly it is formed by anterior communicating artery, anterolaterally by these two anterior cerebral arteries, laterally by these two internal carotid arteries, posterolaterally by these two posterior communicating arteries, and posteriorly by commencement of these posterior cerebral arteries from basilar artery. So this is a circle of Willis. It is said that there runs two parallel individual blood circulation. Okay, so one-sided internal carotid and vertebral will show a continuous blood flow. Similarly, this sided internal carotid and vertebral will show a continuous blood flow. So there is no admixing of the blood across the midline in normal circumstances. But suppose if one main artery gets blocked, then the opposite sided flow will cross the midline to compensate lack of blood supply. So two circulations are running parallel between one-sided vertebral and internal carotid. So this is the intact brain, and as we have discussed in diagram, the boundaries, these two are optic nerves which are continuous behind as optic chiasma. So this is quadrilateral plate, optic chiasma, and posterolaterally it forms optic tract. Now this is pons, okay, this is medulla oblongata. Now upper border of these pons will form posterior boundary of interpeduncular fossa. So this is the territory of interpeduncular fossa, optic chiasma, optic tract, pons, and if you see it deep inside, okay, this is the basis pedunculi, say this, and that forms posterolateral boundary of the interpeduncular fossa. Okay, now as we have discussed that it is related to the circle of Willis, so these vessels are nothing but portion of circle of Willis, say this. Okay, so here this is the posterior cerebral artery, this is portion of basilar artery as we have discussed in diagram, and here will be the internal carotid, say this, small stumps are seen. Okay, and it gives a branch in front. This is the anterior cerebral, say this, this is anterior cerebral. Okay, this is basilar. Okay, Now you can clearly see two posterior cerebral arteries. And now if we have reflected all this, we can clearly see the structures of interpeduncular fossa. Okay, let me zoom in a bit. Now you can clearly make out the boundaries: optic chiasma, optic tracts, basis pedunculi, and this is upper border of the pons, and the contents are tuber cinerarium. See the bulge, and in the center is the infundibulum. These two are mammillary bodies, and posterior to that will be, you can see small vessels. They belong to the branches of posterior cerebral. Okay, and they are forming posterior perforated substance. Okay, let me make it clear from this vessel. So as you can see the posterior perforated substance. See this. You can see some arteries perforating the cerebral cortex. Okay, this is posterior perforated substance. So this is interpeduncular fossa, and here lies the interpeduncular cistern, as we have discussed, which lodges this circle of Willis. Now let me just remove this circle of Willis to make this base of the brain more clear, and then we will see some landmarks. So this needs to be removed as it is having some pile attachments. Okay, so these are the posterior cerebral arteries I am removing, and that will expose the pons and medulla clearly. Okay, the cerebellar arteries. Similarly, I will remove these carotids along with middle cerebral and anterior cerebral. These are anterior cerebrals. They are connected in midline by anterior communicating, which is forming the anterior part of circle of Willis. See this, right and left anterior cerebral connected by this anterior communicating artery. See this is how it is lodging inside, and this is internal carotid with middle cerebral. See this. This is the stem of lateral sulcus. Okay, so I'm removing this internal carotid. See this. Now the things are a bit clear. This is how they are connected to the cerebral cortex. Their branches are lodging the sulci. Okay, so we need to clear it. So now we have removed the blood vessels, and you can clearly see base of the brain, particularly interpeduncular fossa. Again I am repeating, optic chiasma, optic tract. Now they are very clear. These are basis pedunculi, and this is upper border of the pons, tuber cinerarium, infundibulum, mammillary bodies, and posterior perforated substance. So this is interpeduncular fossa. Apart from that, now you can clearly make out uncus. Okay, this is para-hippocampal gyrus, medial and lateral occipitotemporal gyri. Okay, let me show you some of the features related to the brainstem, landmarks of the brainstem. So as I told you, these are two basis pedunculi. This is pons, which is having a sulcus in the midline, and if you closely see it, you will see multiple horizontal sulci or depressions along its course. Okay, and lateral it is continuous with middle cerebellar peduncle. See this. This is middle cerebellar peduncle, with which the pons is connected to the cerebellum, and at its junction with the middle cerebellar peduncle, here you can see stump of trigeminal nerve, which is having two roots, motor and sensory. Medial is the motor root, lateral is the sensory root. Sensory is larger as compared to the medial motor root. Below to that, this is the lower border of the pons. Okay, this is the medulla. Again in the midline there is anteromedian sulcus, and at its commencement along with the lower border of the pons you can see foramen cecum. On either side of this sulcus these are two pyramids. In lower part of pyramid the corticospinal tract will decussate, lodging into this anteromedian sulcus. Lateral to the pyramids these are two olives. Between olive and pyramid there is anterolateral sulcus. Behind olive you can see inferior cerebellar peduncle. See this? Between inferior cerebellar peduncle and olive there is posterolateral sulcus, and medulla is connected to the cerebellum via this inferior cerebellar peduncle. So there are by and large three cerebellar peduncles, superior, middle and inferior, with which the midbrain, pons and medulla are connected to cerebellum respectively. Now let's see attachments of the cranial nerve along the base of the brain. First is olfactory nerve. As you know, olfactory nerves are 15 to 20 in number and they will commence at root of the nose from the olfactory mucosa. They will traverse through this cribriform plate of ethmoid and they end up into these olfactory bulbs. Okay, so these olfactory bulbs, these are the olfactory bulbs. They are related to this cribriform plate of ethmoid. So here lies the olfactory bulbs and the olfactory nerves will end up into these bulbs. Second is optic nerve. This is optic nerve. As you know, it emerges out from optic canals. So these two are optic canals and these two will end up into the optic chiasma. So here is the optic chiasma that you know. Third is oculomotor. Oculomotor will emerge out from medial border of this basis pedunculi. There is a sulcus deep inside and somewhere over here will be the oculomotor nerve emerging out. Fourth is trochlear. This is the only cranial nerve emerging out from dorsal aspect. Now both the trochlear nerves will wind around this basis pedunculi. And this third and fourth cranial nerve, you know, they will traverse through this cavernous sinus and they will then pass through superior orbital fissure to enter into the orbit. Next is fifth, trigeminal nerve. As already we have discussed, it will emerge out at its junction between pons and middle cerebellar peduncle. See over here, this is a small stump seen. This is the trigeminal nerve. As I told you, it is having two roots, medial motor and lateral sensory. The sensory is larger as compared to the motor, and this trigeminal nerve, as you know, it divides into ophthalmic, maxillary and mandibular nerve. So the ophthalmic and maxillary will traverse through cavernous sinus and ophthalmic will pass through the supraorbital fissure by dividing into frontal, nasociliary and lacrimal, whereas the maxillary will pass through this foramen rotundum and mandibular division will pass through this foramen ovale. Sixth cranial nerve, abducent. It will emerge out at pontomedullary junction between pons and pyramid over here. Again, along with third and fourth cranial nerve, it will pass through cavernous sinus and it will leave the cranial cavity by passing through supraorbital fissure to enter into the orbit. Lateral to the abducent in relation to the olive at its junction with pons over here at pontomedullary junction between pons and olive. Here there emerges seventh cranial nerve, facial. Again it is having two divisions, motor and sensory. The motor is medial and sensory is lateral. It is not seen over here but you can clearly make out this is the lower border of pons and this is olive. So somewhere over here the facial nerve will emerge out and the motor division is larger as compared to the smaller lateral sensory division, which is termed as nervus intermedius, and lateral to that at its junction between inferior cerebellar peduncle and pons, over here you can see vestibulocochlear nerve. Now it is preserved over here so you can make out this is the stump of vestibulocochlear nerve. Again it is having two roots, medial vestibular and lateral cochlear. Along with the facial nerve, its motor and sensory root. These nerves will leave the cranial cavity by passing through this internal acoustic meatus. So here will be 7th and 8th cranial nerve. Next is glossopharyngeal. So 3 cranial nerves, 9th, 10th and 11th, will emerge out at the posterolateral sulcus between olive and inferior cerebellar peduncle over here from above downward. 9th, 10th and 11th, particularly cranial root of accessory nerve, will emerge out, and these three together will leave the cranial cavity by passing through this jugular foramen. Okay, this is jugular foramen. So it will allow passage of 9th, 10th and 11th cranial nerve. And last is hypoglossal 12th cranial nerve will emerge out at anteromedial sulcus between olive and pyramid by 3 to 4 small rootlets, and as you know it leaves the cranial cavity by passing through hypoglossal canal. So this is how all these cranial nerves will attach and will emerge out from base of the brain. So far we have discussed about base of the brain, its sulci and gyri, boundaries of interpeduncular fossa, something about circle of Willis, some of the external features of brainstem, and attachments of the cranial nerves along the base of the brain. Hope you understood well. Thanks for watching.